Later, Dimicelli would be investigated for running prostitution out of his business. So he's not quite as clean. But I don't know. I don't know that it means he was getting shaken down. Now we're going to kind of pivot away from the extortion and just focus on Peter Sciortino. Tensions in the Milwaukee Mafia family were up a little bit in June 1964 when Frank Balistrieri found out that another Peter Sciortino had come to Milwaukee from Tucson, Arizona. This Sciortino was an alleged member of the Joe Bonanno crime family and had spoken with John Alioto, and Frank Balistrieri was not informed about him being in town. According to Mafia protocol, Balistrieri should have been informed that a member of another Mafia family was in town.
Remind me, the Joe Bonanno crime family, what is that? Is that Chicago?
That is New York.
New York.
And okay. Joe Bonanno is one of the biggest mob guys in American history. Like,
that's terrible. That
top of the top.
You know, for all those people out there that are really into the mob and they're like, what the hell is this guy doing on this podcast, not knowing who Joe Bonanno is?
No, it's a good question. Because if you don't know, people don't know.
Yeah. I know I recognize the name. I just couldn't put where,
Yeah, so Joe Bonanno was one of the big guys in New York, and he was the guy who would get the most headlines, the most newspaper coverage. The story, exactly how this plays out, is debatable, but basically there's rumors that he was trying to take over other mafia families in New York, and he basically went into self-exile down to like Phoenix, Arizona, and rather than them assassinating him, they just kind of said, stay out of New York. So he instead has like this separate, his crime family's still operating in New York, but he's got this separate little small mob group in Arizona.
Okay, and that's where this guy came from.
That's where this guy came from, yeah.
Okay.
Here's where it gets weird. The Peter Sciortino of Tucson, Arizona was both a cousin and a brother-in-law of the Peter Sciortino of Milwaukee. Also, he operated a bakery. So they're cousins. They have the same grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
On top of this, the Peter Sciortino of Milwaukee is married to the Peter Sciortino of Tucson's sister.
Wow. Which
would mean that he's married to his own cousin.
Wow.
So it's weird.
But now, isn't that somewhat normal in Italian
It's somewhat
culture
normal.
Because they're very close and they end up marrying very closely to each other?
They do. I think like, marrying your cousin is kind of weird. But yeah, it's not out of the ordinary.
But there's generally their marriage, there's going to be like a shorter gap between them in relation, basically.
Correct.
Second, third cousins are not uncommon or anything like that.
Correct. I don't know if we talked about that on here or on the Patreon, but yes, that's our fancy word called consanguinity. And yes, there's been studies that in Italy, generally husbands and wives are closer related than they are in other countries. I don't know why. It's some kind of cultural thing, but while in Milwaukee, the Tucson Sciortino purchased a 1964 Buick Electra at Frescona Buick in Wauwatosa. Here's another fun part. The owner of Frescona Buick is a man named Frank Balistrieri.
Which is not our Frank Balistrieri.
Which is not. He is a cousin of our Frank Balistrieri. So a cousin of our Peter Sciortino bought a Buick from a cousin of our Frank Balistrieri.
Wow.
Yeah. You can imagine how much fun when they're writing these reports, trying to keep these things straight. Yeah. A hidden microphone caught a mafia meeting in June 18th, 1964, where one member of the group was scolded for not functioning properly. Balistrieri was upset that this Peter Sciortino had come from Tucson and was entertained without him being notified. So they caught him on a hidden microphone actually complaining about it. But it's like, this guy comes around, you don't even tell me. At a meeting on June 30th, 1964, the Peter Sciortino of Tucson is still in town, So he's called to a mob meeting. Balistrieri tries to talk to him about the Bonanno family, but Sciortino said that he was just a soldier in the Bonanno family and was not authorized to say anything without clearance from his boss, who would be Charles Battaglia. Balistrieri agreed. He goes, technically, yes, you're right. So I guess we won't have this conversation. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. Milwaukee's Peter Sciortino was interviewed by the FBI on March 19th, 1965. They asked if he had family in Tucson. And Sciortino explained, again, that the other Peter was his cousin and his brother-in-law. He said that the Tucson Peter was in Milwaukee in 1964 and was away to New York and Canada to visit relatives. The Milwaukee Peter said he didn't know if the Tucson Peter was in the mafia, but wouldn't be surprised if he was, and knew that he had business dealings with Joe Bonanno. The Milwaukee Peter had met Bonanno, but had not seen him in years. He explained that he had met him because his wife's family, which is also his cousin's family, had grown up a block away from Bonanno in New York when they were kids, so they had just known him forever. The Milwaukee Peter said that after his bakery was bombed, he had told the Tucson Peter about it. There was a rumor that the Tucson Peter then told Joe Bonanno, who in turn told Frank Balistrieri to leave the Milwaukee Peter alone. But the Milwaukee Peter never asked for this favor and did not know if it actually happened. This was just a rumor he had heard. He lastly said that if this wasn't confusing enough, he has two more cousins also named Peter Sciortino, and they both live in Brooklyn.
So I'm going to try to piece this back together. So
yeah, run it back.
So Joe Bonanno, there's a rumor that Joe Bonanno called Frank Balistrieri and said, leave alone the Milwaukee Peter Sciortino.
Yes.
Which would... Really, Joe Bonanno has no reason to care about the Milwaukee one, right? He was probably talking about the Tucson one that was in Milwaukee.
He has really no reason to do that, but it doesn't mean he couldn't do it.
But why would he?
If the Tucson Peter Sciortino asked that favor, he could do it. Technically, bosses are equal, and he shouldn't be able to do anything about it. But Joe Bonanno's kind of like, he's a big guy, and he could probably ask favors of smaller families, being like, "Hey, give this guy in Milwaukee a pass. He's close with one of my guys." I don't know. I think if that happened, it's so much behind the scenes that we would never know how that played out, because I'm going to go on record as saying I think the Milwaukee Peter Sciortino is being honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he did not ask for that, and I think that he doesn't know what happened.
If it actually even happened.
If it even happened.
Really.
And I think he's being a little, when he says he doesn't know if his cousin's in the mafia, I mean, he's kind of on the fence. He goes, I don't know, but I wouldn't doubt it.
Mm-hmm.
I think he probably knows.
He knows, yeah.
Yeah, I think he probably knows. And then, where he denies that he's being, asked to make payments, that's where I find that a little questionable. Because if he's not being asked to make payments, then why was he bombed?
Yeah.
You don't just get randomly bombed without, being told why you're getting bombed.
Mm-hmm.
So that's weird to me. So I don't think he's I don't think he's lying, but I don't think he's completely telling everything either.
Well, and don't you think that in most scenarios when somebody is pulled in by the cops and interviewed by the police, that's probably what they're doing. They're probably, they're telling the truth to an extent, but I think in every situation, probably somebody leaves something out.
Well, I will respond to that and say, I think most people, when they talk to the police, are probably mostly honest.
Right.
I think maybe a little less so in these sort of mafia situations, because the Milwaukee Peter